Let's now take a look at why a country needs a parliament. The main political institutions of a society are the state and the government. The other political institutions too originate from them. Although the state and the government are interconnected, they are not one and the same. The state is a concept and the government is an organization which is empowered by the citizens for a short period of time to carry out the responsibilities and functions of the state on behalf of the citizens. It can also be defined as the combination of the forces and institutions created to govern a state society. A state is considered the highest form of political association. State is not government, but without government, it cannot be called a state. There are four main elements of a state. Number 1, territory. Number 2, population. Number 3, the government. And number 4, sovereignty. Let's take a look at the first requirement, a territory. The modern nation state is established within a defined boundary of its authority. It is organized within a clear territory. Number 2, population. The modern state is formed based on nationalism. Nationalism is the ideology of treating all people living within the state borders as one nation with one identity. Government. The government is the organization that implements the sovereignty of the state. In other words, the institutional system by which state power is exercised is the government. The third requirement of a state is the government. Now, the government is the organization that implements the sovereignty of the state. In other words, the institutional system by which the state power is exercised. The three institutions that comprise of the government includes the legislature or the parliament, which legislates or creates laws for the people, the executive, the arm that enforces those laws, and the judiciary, which is empowered with the administration of justice. There are different types of governments, such as democratic governments, dictatorial governments, authoritarian governments, and socialist governments. The fourth requirement of a state is sovereignty. This means the authority of a state. Sovereignty of the state is the absolute power of society that no other organization has. This means that the state's power to legislate, to enforce laws with all its might, and to punish violators of those laws. There are many who confuse between a state and a government. There is a difference, they're not one and the same. What is the difference between a state and a government? The state represents a wider and more stable entity than government. Government is regarded as an essential element of the state. In actual practice, the state is represented by the government. The government exercises all authority and functions on behalf of the state. Let's now take a look at some of the main differences between a government and a state. Government is only an element of the state. A state has four essential elements: population, territory, government, and sovereignty. The government is only one element of the state. It is just one part of the state which acts for and on behalf of the state. The government is a form of agency or an agent of the state. It acts for the state. It is that agency of the state which formulates the will of the state into laws, implement the laws of the state, and ensure conforming to the laws of the state. Government exercises power and authority on behalf of the state. The state is abstract. The government is concrete. A state is a concept, an idea, or a name used to denote a community of persons living on a definite territory and organized for the exercise of sovereignty. A state cannot be seen. A government is made by the people of the state. It is formed by the representatives of the people. It has a definite and defined organization and form. It can be seen as a team of people exercising the powers of the state. Membership of the state is compulsory, but not of the government. All people are citizens of the state. They together constitute the population of the state. Each one normally gets membership, also known as citizenship, of a state automatically right at the time of one's birth and continue to live life as such. However, membership of the government is not automatic. Government is organized only by a portion of the population of the state. The whole population is part of the state. All the people are citizens of the state. However, the government is made by the representatives of the people. Only some people who get elected as representatives of the people form the government of the state. And finally, the state is permanent, but the government is temporary. Governments come and go regularly. After every general election, the government changes. It can also undergo a total change through an election or even through a revolution. State is permanent. It continuously lives so long as it continues to enjoy sovereignty. There are three main pillars of government. Let's take a look at what they are. The governance of a state is traditionally divided into three branches, each with separate and independent powers and functions. The three branches of the government are the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The function of the legislature can be defined as making laws. This is also known in Sri Lanka as the Parliament, where laws are drafted to govern the citizenry. The executive is entrusted with the responsibility of enforcing those laws. And finally, the judiciary is entrusted with administering justice among the citizenry. The distribution of power in this sphere is intended to prevent any one branch or person from being supreme and to introduce checks and balances through which one branch may limit the powers of another. According to a strict interpretation of the separation of powers, none of the three branches may exercise the powers of the other, nor should any person be a member of more than one of these three branches. Let's now take a look at the role of the legislature. The legislature or parliament is the body in charge of the legislative process of government. Legislature, sometimes called parliament, senate, or congress, performs three key roles: representation of the people, passing effective legislation, and oversight of government. The parliament is not the only source of legislation in a country. Laws are made both ritually and by judicial precedents. But Parliament is the only body that has the power to legislate for a country. Representatives are elected to Parliament by the people at a vote, and Parliament makes the will of the people into laws. The legislature or Parliament is the primary source of law. Even if there are other sources of law, those sources of legislation also come from Parliament. It plays an important role in defending, advancing, and representing democratic values. In addition to legislation, the powers of Parliament include the passing of government budgets, financial control, confirmation of executive appointments, approval of contracts, scrutiny of the executive branch, and impeachment and removal of members of the executive and the judiciary. Let's now take a look at the nature of the Sri Lankan government and the parliament. In order to discuss the nature of the Sri Lankan government and parliament, one must first be aware of the types of government and parliaments. There are several forms of governments in the world, starting with the federal government. Now, under a federal government, a central government shares powers with a number of small or local governments. India is a good example for a federal government democracy. Then there is a democratic government, where the government is elected by the people. There are also governments of plutocracy, a government composed of a wealthy class. Oligarchy is another form of government. It's a rule by a small group of people who share either similar interests or family relations. One of the most popular forms of government in the current day is a capitalistic government. Under a capitalistic government, people can own their own businesses and property, but usually pay taxes from some of the money that they make. Most capitalistic governments provide their own education, health, and welfare services. Another form of government is the age-old monarchy. Now, under a monarchy, it is a rule by an individual king or queen who has inherited the role, and it is expected to be passed on to their heirs. There are also regional or local governments. Now, this is a government or council that controls a smaller area within a country. Most local governments are controlled by the central government. Communism, a communist form of government. Under such an administration, the government owns businesses and farms. It provides healthcare, education, and welfare to its citizens. There is also a form of governance known as constitutional monarchy. Under this form, it has a democratic government that limits the control of the monarch, which could be a king or a queen. There is also a transitional government. A country that is changing from one type of government to another would generally have a transitional form of government. Despotism is also a form of governance. It is a rule by a single leader. All his or her subjects are considered his or her slaves. A totalitarian government is where a country with one political party. In England, there are three main political parties: the Labour, the Conservative, and Liberal Democrats. This is not a totalitarian state. Then there is a form of government known as a revolutionary government. It is a government. Then we can identify a revolutionary form of government. Now, if a government is overthrown by a force, the overthrowing government is sometimes called a revolutionary government. Also, a state of governance in certain countries in the world is a state of anarchy. This is a situation where there is no government. A republic. A country that has no monarch and the head of the country is usually an elected president. Sri Lanka is a republic. Dictatorship. Now, this is where a country is ruled by a single leader who has full power over the country. The leader is not elected. Another form of government is a unitary government. This is where a country is governed through a centralized system.